While the servants in the corridor discussed an upcoming event, Lariette, using her newly honed stealth skills, passed by unnoticed. She had developed her stealth to such a degree that she could move undetected. Overjoyed by her progress, she hurried to her room. However, upon entering, she was startled to find a strange man inside. He, too, seemed to have mastered the stealth skill and froze as though caught in the act. Calmly, Lariette closed the door behind her and asked who he was and what he was doing in her chambers. The man, clearly nervous, stammered that he was from the Duke's new detachment and begged for forgiveness. Lariette, suspicious since she had never seen him before, pressed him further. The man, panicking, explained that he had gotten lost and wandered into her room by accident. She then questioned why he had been using stealth. Still visibly uneasy, he replied that the Shadow Squad always operated covertly, even inside the mansion. He explained that, although he was still a beginner, his skills were quite good and praised Larette's own skills before hastily apologizing and leaving the room. Lariette, though polite, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this encounter. After the man left, she went into the corridor, where she found the butler and servants still discussing events. When she called out to the butler, he jumped in surprise, and Lariette, looking thoughtful, told him that she suspected there was a spy in their house. The butler was visibly shocked at this realization. As soon as the Duke, Asher, found out about the possible danger, he rushed to Lariette, fearing something might happen to her. He hugged her tenderly and whispered her name into her ear, unable to understand how a spy had slipped through their defenses, especially since all newcomers had undergone thorough vetting. Asher had been the one who made the final decision in their screening process, but he had let his guard down. Despite knowing he had many enemies, he had become complacent. "I let my guard down too much," Asher muttered, his arms tightening around her. He apologized for putting her in danger, but Lariette reassured him that she was fine and nothing had happened. Still, Asher remained upset and angry with himself. Lariette tried to calm him, telling him that everything was normal, nothing had been harmed, and no one had been harmed. Despite the tension, Lariette felt touched by Asher's concern for her. She hugged him back, grateful for his care. Asher, still focused on the situation, glanced over at the trembling subordinates who were hiding behind the sofa. They were clearly intimidated by the guards. Lariette, taking Asher's face in her hands, kissed him softly on the lips and repeated that she was fine and he need not worry. Afterward, Lariette quickly said goodbye to the man, explaining that she had an important meeting the next day and needed to get some rest. With that, she hurriedly left the room. Asher returned to the sofa, where Melissa and Gerard were sitting. He was about to scold Lariette, since she was the one entrusted with training the newcomers. Lariette, bowing her head before him, declared that she had no excuses and would accept any punishment for her actions. A mad look flashed across the Duke's face, and he asked her what kind of punishment she expected if Lariette had been hurt. The girl, kneeling in front of him, expressed her regret, and then Asher turned to Gerard, asking for the location of the attacker. Gerard, his head down, reported that, after Lariette caught him, the man disappeared, and it seemed the other recruits associated with him also managed to leave without a trace. Their whereabouts had been unknown since yesterday. Asher was surprised, and Gerard added that so far they hadn't discovered the true purpose of the intrusion, but it was clear it was something secret. All of the personal information they had gathered turned out to be false. Gerard promised they would uncover the truth soon. Looking at his subordinates, Asher said, "I'm giving you exactly 1 week to gather all the necessary information." The atmosphere in the estate grew tense. Lariette barely had time to hide her personal belongings for the trip and her notebook, as Asher stayed close to her every moment. Despite this, Lariette still made her way to the tea party. During the gathering, Lady Mershyn, with a pleading expression, asked Lariette to find time to meet with Asher, justifying that it would strengthen their friendship. The other girls found this request strange, and even the princess commented that Lady Mershyn should refrain from making unreasonable demands. Lady Mershyn, looking indignant, asked Lariette why she couldn't simply have lunch with her, questioning whether it would be so difficult. Lariette responded that it wasn't difficult, but, looking at Lady Mershyn with an indifferent and dissatisfied expression, She explained that she simply didn't want to. The young lady, clearly displeased, glared at Lariette. She insisted that if a person of lower status refused a request from someone of higher status, they needed to explain why. Lariette, unfazed, explained that Asha was quite shy and didn't like such gatherings with other ladies. Lady Merchant was furious, unable to understand how a commoner like Lariette could repay her kindness in this way. She believed Lariette, with her low status, had no business sitting at the same table as her. Lady Merchant thought that she had been treating the heroine kindly only because the princess had brought her here. But now Lariette dared to hide behind Asha. This irritated her even more. Lady Merchant was disappointed that someone of Lariette's insignificant status was with such an ideal man like Asha. She tried to convince herself that the Duke would never marry her, obviously not in this lifetime. Looking at the princess, she begged for some response, hoping that she would say something to put Lariette in her place. But Lariette, understanding everything from a single glance, stood up from her seat and suddenly announced that she wasn't feeling well and would be leaving first. Afterward, Lariette smiled and apologized if she had unintentionally ruined Lady Merchant's mood. As she left, Eliza immediately rushed after her, Lady Merchant watching all this with a smile, then grinned and remarked on how kind the princess was, noting how hard it was to believe that Eliza would be willing to get angry on her behalf. The girl thought that the princess had gone to argue with Lariette, a thought which made her smile as she covered her face with her hands. One of the ladies sitting at the same table with her understood how absurd her words were, but said nothing. As Lariette headed toward the exit, it became immediately clear to her that Lady Merchant had fallen in love with Asha at first sight. Despite this, Lariette made concessions to everyone and did everything that was asked of her. Even when the demands were unreasonable, she behaved maturely and satisfied their requests, but she couldn't understand why people kept asking for more when she felt she had nothing left to give. For the first time in her life, she had friends, and she didn't know how to navigate such situations. She wondered if the problem lay in her own greed or in her desire to make friends before her death. Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice calling her name. Turning around, Lariette saw Eliza approaching. The princess apologized, explaining that Lady Merchant had been rude and that she had been unable to prevent it. Eliza bowed her head, asking for Larette's forgiveness on behalf of someone else. Shocked, Lariette told her not to apologize, but the princess insisted. Eliza explained that she had brought Sharia here because she couldn't leave her alone when she was unable to integrate into secular society. The princess recalled how difficult it had been for her Nana to join that same society due to her hot temper, so Eliza had hoped that helping Sharia would be beneficial. She added that she hadn't realized that different people might lead to different outcomes, but she was determined to talk to Sharia about it. The princess's heart sank when she saw how much her close friend was suffering. She then promised that if something like this happened again, she would be glad if Lariette didn't hold back and told her everything honestly. Lariette rushed to hug her and thank her for personally following her, but Eliza reassured her that she hadn't suffered and urged her not to worry. As they parted ways, the princess reminded her to be careful on the way back. Lariette gently placed her hand on Eliza's cheek, telling her that she even enjoyed their spontaneous little training session. They stood together for a while, talking quietly, laughing and smiling at each other. Doha, who had been watching from a distance, felt annoyed by Larette's closeness to Eliza. Suddenly he began to wonder what might have happened if he had met Lariette before the others. He asked himself if he would have had a chance at any kind of relationship with her. He knew he was acting irrationally, and the anger he felt made him squeeze a nearby tree so tightly that its bark began to crack. He realized that Lariette was the reason his mood had soured, 1,000 times worse than it had been earlier. He wasn't sure what he wanted from her. Whether it was worth trying to possess her, or better to push her away using his power. He remained hidden from the princess as she passed by him, unsure of his next move. Only after that did he, looking back at her, suddenly realize everything. Lariette, watching her friend leave, suspiciously glanced straight at the priest, although she shouldn't have noticed him. She then began talking about how early Doha had arrived, He grinned, realizing that she had indeed seen him. The man asked how she managed to notice him, and the girl beamed with joy, realizing she was making progress. Lariette started telling something to her friend, but he didn't listen, his attention now focused on the princess. Only now did he realize that the figure wasn't a man, but the princess herself. He turned sharply toward Lariette, looking her straight in the eyes, and continued listening as she talked about how she had recently become able to discern a high level of secrecy. Doha praised Lariette, saying that her skills had really improved. However, he privately thought that soon she would begin to notice the shadow knight who had been following her. The heroine then remembered how her friend had recommended a good establishment where they made delicious desserts. Lariette recalled that the priest had mentioned he loved sweets, so they decided to invite him there. He smiled and replied that he didn't mind, but in his heart he realized that he could no longer run from his feelings. No matter how much he denied it, he knew that his place was beside her. Later, in the Duke's bedroom, while he sat on the bed, Lariette told him that this time would be the last, and the cleansing would be over. This phrase echoed in his head as the curse had tormented him all his life, and he had thought he would never be rid of it. Asher remembered when the cleansing had first started, when Lariette had begun to help him. He had trusted her completely, and now all he could do was be happy and forget about the curse. Sitting between the man's legs, the girl asked if he was ready, looking into his eyes. Without answering, the Duke gently cupped her face and pulled her toward him, kissing her tenderly. He then moved away, laying her comfortably under him, and continued to shower her with tender kisses. Their bodies brushed against each other through the fabric of their clothes. The Duke decided to distract Lariette from business once again. Their kiss was passionate, sensual, and full of love. It ended only in the early morning. Lariette, tired, lounged on the bed while Asher sat beside her, watching her. The girl declared that what had happened between them was divine, which slightly embarrassed the Duke. Closing her eyes, Lariette called Candle closer. Rising, she rested her head on his chest and asked him about the advice he had given her about seduction during the cleansing. Asher recalled how Lariette had threatened never to kiss him again, and he smiled at the memory. The girl warned him to be careful in the future because she could be a very scary woman. He told her he understood. Lariette then looked out the window and realized it was already morning, but she wasn't in a hurry. She suddenly started talking about the idea of taking a trip together, just the two of them, to the river or the sea. For her, the important thing was that he would be with her, and the destination didn't matter. Looking at her, the man suddenly realized that he had never considered traveling with Lariette. The idea of doing so now sounded wonderful. He began to imagine how they would stand on the seashore, gazing into the distance as the sun burned their skin and the water gently splashed around their feet. Smiling, Asher said he was very glad that Lariette had suggested the idea. He thought it was a wonderful plan and gently straightened her hair. He told her that there was a place not far from the sea within his territory where hot spring water was also available. He left a soft kiss on her cheek as she excitedly talked about how they should go there as soon as possible, since summer was just around the corner. He agreed with her idea. Meanwhile, Gerard and Melissa were desperately searching for any clues. The guy felt like life was slipping away from him because he couldn't find anything. The voice of his master echoed in his head, demanding that he find everything within a week. Suddenly, while Melissa was rummaging through the closet, she exclaimed that she had found something. Gerard immediately rushed to her, his face lighting up. "I love you," he said, but she immediately pushed him away. After that, they both decided to study the papers laid out in front of them. Melissa quickly realized that if the document wasn't touched with special gloves, its magic would dissipate. However, it was clear that someone had already handled it, and even managed to make a copy. Comparing everything they knew, she concluded that the scammers were aware of the document and had come specifically for it. These documents were capable of bringing everything to an end. When they reported this to Ear, he personally appeared and explained that the document pertained to trade with the Danu kingdom. Now, he understood that it was definitely the work of Duke Illington, who wanted Duke Candle to participate in the war. It then occurred to him that if there were no traces left on the document, the Blain family's magicians must have been involved. Slamming his fist on the table so hard that it cracked, Ia turned to Melissa and asked what exactly she thought they should do with the document. Looking away, Melissa suggested that at the next meeting the Duke of Illington would likely use the papers as evidence of Asher's connection to the Danu kingdom. This would lead to Duke L being accused of treason, and to prove his innocence he would be forced to participate in the war. Perhaps things would have turned out differently if Asher had the support of the nobles, but that was not the case. The Duke had no desire to live, nor did he see any point in engaging with the nobility or participating in political life. This, Melissa concluded, was his biggest mistake. Gerard asked if he should begin preparing for war, to which Ia responded, "It seems so." While deep in thought, Ia realized that if he participated in the war, he would need to plan his time carefully. If things went as planned, he could spend some time alone with Lariette. She would wait for him, as she always did, and when the time came, they would meet again. Despite everything, Duke Candle had hoped for a chance at an ordinary life, but once again he was deprived of this opportunity, being sent to war against his will. He turned to his subordinates and instructed them to prepare all the necessary materials for the mission. Meanwhile, in a conversation between Lariette and the priest, the girl told him that she had improved her stealth abilities, but noticed something strange. Looking away, Doha said he would help her, though his ears turned red. He hoped she wouldn't notice this or guess the reason behind it. Turning back to her with a smile, Doha reflected that he was not the person Lariette loved, and he couldn't let himself get caught up in those feelings. He didn't want to be away from her, though. Carefully, the priest took Larette's hands and began to use his magic. She smiled joyfully as the magic worked, while Doha, deep inside, realized that only he would be able to remember the feelings he had kept hidden for so long. When they finished, Lariette thanked him and smiled, saying she understood everything. Afterward, Lariette showed the man her skills, and he clapped for her, which made her happy. However, Doha suddenly asked if Lariette was going on a trip, because earlier she had mentioned wanting to travel alone. Lariette didn't remember telling him about this. The priest, sitting down on the grass, invited her to rest a bit, and then asked if she had any plans that Duke Candle didn't know about. Lariette still couldn't remember when she had mentioned anything like this to him. Sitting beside her, she realized that it didn't really matter now, as it would happen regardless after breaking up with Asher. Looking at Doha, Lariette admitted that she hadn't told her lover anything about this. Doha, curious, asked why she suddenly wanted to travel alone. He couldn't understand it. If the Duke was busy, he would probably still have time for her. Travelling alone seemed like a lot of trouble, and yet Lariette was insisting on it. He wondered if there were circumstances she was finding difficult to explain. Looking at the main character, the priest asked if she really planned to leave after breaking up with Asher. Doha considered his own question foolish, as he knew that their bond was inseparable. But to his surprise, Lariette nodded, confirming that she would leave after the breakup. Realizing that she wasn't joking, Doha's eyes widened in shock. He wasn't sure how to react to this, and for a moment a smile appeared on his face, but he quickly covered it, not wanting to show his true feelings. Lariette understood that Doha was her benefactor. He had always been kind to her, treating her well and helping her in her personal life. He had even agreed to teach her magic. Now he was a close friend, so she decided to be honest with him. She told him that her relationship with Asher was purely contractual, lasting only 3 months. Doha was stunned by this revelation. He couldn't believe they had signed a contract without any romantic feelings involved. Lariette continued, explaining that when she and the Duke first met, it was she who proposed the relationship. She told Doha almost everything, except for her secret. Doha couldn't understand why Duke Candle, who didn't seem the type to enter a contractual relationship, would agree to this arrangement. He also questioned whether the Duke's feelings for Lariette could even be called love. Considering the curse had been cleared, His feelings seemed to go beyond mere affection. While he was processing all of this, Lariette asked him to keep it a secret, as she didn't want any rumors to spread. Doha smiled and promised, "Of course I won't tell anyone. It couldn't be any other way." Maybe, in the distant future, his deeply hidden feelings would finally reach Lariette, and he would be able to open his heart to her. That evening, terrible screams echoed from the Blain family estate, coming from Rayon's room. He screamed in agony, calling out for his sister as he writhed in pain. His father stood there, unable to believe that his daughter was still clinging to Duke Candle, saying that she had become too arrogant. Then he turned to a man named Delvin, whom Lariette had run into that day in her room. He worked for her father. The man explained that Lariette, as a Blain, couldn't just pass on their bloodline to anyone. Since she had renounced Seven, they couldn't think about any benefits from a marriage with him, which meant their strongest magician shouldn't be involved with the Duke. The father recalled that he had deliberately raised Lariette with naivety, restricting her development so she couldn't betray him. But she had, in the end, abandoned the family, running away with Asher. Rayon, writhing in pain from convulsions, shouted his sister's name, bitterly angry at her for leaving. He believed she had broken the family and abandoned him. Now he could only think that she wanted to live happily ever after, leaving him and their family behind. The Duke, looking down at Delvin, ordered him to find her, or even kill her, so that he wouldn't have to suffer with this girl any longer. The head of the family didn't want his own little dog to bite him in the neck. They needed to be careful, to think through every detail and destroy the main character without leaving a trace. The next day, Lariette decided to visit Madame Jabe's boutique. As soon as they met, the girl rushed to hug her friend, immediately noticing how much weight Lariette had lost. Concerned, she asked what had happened. Lariette explained that nothing was wrong, that everything was fine, though she remembered her recent training with Doha, when she had pushed herself to exhaustion during training, almost dying in the process. Doha had supported her through it, but now all her energy was spent. Lariette didn't visit her friend just for a casual chat. She had a reason. The brooch she had bought for Asher had suddenly broken, so she wanted to find another gift for him. Essa had once mentioned that the brooch had been used too often, which caused it to break quickly, and that had upset him deeply. The boutique mistress immediately left, saying she had just the thing. She returned with a pendant, explaining that she had bought a few in the hopes that it would soon become popular. The jewelry was made so that, instead of photographs, people could store symbols of their relationships in them. Looking at the pendant, Lariette immediately thought of Issa's eyes. They were almost the same colour. She knew right away that this was a perfect gift for him. Having received a substantial amount of money for her treatment of Doha, she felt justified in spending some of it on this. Her friend even offered a discount, but Lariette refused, feeling the need to pay full price. She thought that, perhaps, this pendant would remind Asher of her from time to time, even after she was gone. A picture formed in her mind of the man carefully kissing the piece of jewellery after remembering his beloved, even after her death. She truly hoped it would be like that. As Lariette was leaving the boutique, she collided with a man, and he almost knocked her down, but this wasn't an accident. A few seconds later, she realised that her bag had disappeared from her hand. She couldn't believe it. It had happened to her again. She was always unlucky with pickpockets, perhaps looking like an easy target. Rushing after him, Lariette quickly realised that she had no mana left, even to run. She couldn't use magic to help herself, and it was hard to catch up when the thief had already turned a corner.